This happened when I was 15 years old. My best friend Anthony wanted me to come over for the night, since his parents would be gone all weekend. I rode my bike over and put it in his backyard before letting myself in through his back door. We played basically every video game he had, from FIFA all the way to Call of Duty, with popcorn and other junk food spilled out all over the floor. As the night progressed, we moved from video games to watching half a movie and getting bored, to doing prank calls at close to 10 o'clock. Anthony made a few calls to different pizza places. When it was my turn, I just dialed a few random numbers in hopes to get someone at their house. On, say, my fourth attempt, I finally reached somebody. A guy with a deep and rough voice picked up, answering with a yeah instead of a hello. Anthony's laughing in the background made me stumble with my words mid-sentence, ultimately cracking up into laughter. I had never done a prank call, so I sucked at it. The guy on the other end was silent. I regained a straight face and tried to continue with the call. It went something like this. Sir, would it be alright if I borrowed one of the wheels from your car? What's your name, kid? My name is Bob. Really? You sure it's not Anthony? It hit me like a brick. I looked up at Anthony, whose face was noticeably full of fear. I hung up the phone, not wanting to be on the line with whoever that was for another second. Anthony, who the hell was that? I asked him. I don't know, he told me. Does your caller ID info display your name or something? No, it shows my dad's name. We hopped on the computer and did some research, trying to figure out how it was possible to get someone's name through their phone number. It didn't make sense how he could get Anthony's name so quickly. He was way too young at the time to be on any of those personal information sharing websites. We ended up asking a question on Yahoo Answers, since no one had a similar experience. The question turned up no answers. I suggested he call his dad, but he said he wasn't supposed to have anybody over for the weekend, so he didn't want to call. We planned on sleeping in the living room, so we just resumed watching the movie that we hadn't finished from earlier. Right after the phone call had left my mind, me and Anthony looked at each other when we heard his front storm door opening, and then the doorknob to the front door began to turn. It only was able to turn about halfway before the lock restricted it. Anthony turned off the TV, and I went over to the window to see who it was. I spread the blinds open. There was a tall guy standing outside. He noticed the blinds moving, and turned to look at me. I practically threw the blinds back into place. Me and Anthony hid in the kitchen, listening for any more noises. We heard the sound of the gate to the backyard opening, as it was right outside the kitchen window. God damn it, I said. I forgot to shut the back door. Anthony urged me to run and shut it. I made it to the hallway leading to his back door, and froze. There was a silhouette standing outside the back door. I don't think he noticed me, but he was surely looking into the house. He opened the door and stepped inside. I tiptoed to the kitchen and motioned for Anthony to follow me upstairs. We made it to his room as quietly as possible, pulling the door shut to avoid making any noise. We crawled under his bed. He had cloth covering the bottom of his bed, so you couldn't see anything under it unless you actually moved the cloth. The doors downstairs all opened, each one getting closer to the stairs. Thumps finally began up the stairs, and he was right outside the door now. The door to the room opened. I could hear Anthony's breathing. It was too loud. Footsteps moved over to the closet, and then the closet opened. I could hear the coat hangers being slid around as the fabric of the jackets and coats rubbed against each other. Footsteps moved over to the bed and stopped. I felt like my heart was about to explode out of my chest. Anthony's breathing was too loud. I had to cover his mouth with my hand. Nothing but silence in the room now. We laid still for so long, I almost thought he wasn't even in the room anymore. I moved my hand away from Anthony's mouth and whispered in his ear, "You think we can make a run for it?" He was about to answer when the most disturbing, memory-haunting scream I'd ever heard filled my ears as Anthony was seemingly dragged out from under the bed. I crawled out and saw him struggling with the man. I desperately looked around for anything to use as a weapon. I settled with the screwdriver sitting on his nightstand. I hurried over to the man and drove the screwdriver into his back. He let go of Anthony as he let out a scream of agony, giving us time to get the hell out of the house. Running onto the road would give away our position too easily. It would take too long to make it to his neighbor's house. We dove for the tree line in the woods and took cover behind a bush, watching the house. The back door opened as the man stepped outside, looking around the backyard. He then looked out to the woods. I felt his eyes pass me as he scanned through the tree line. It seemed that it was too dark for him to see us. Then, he turned his head back in our direction. I ducked behind the bush.
Joe, he's coming.
What?
Dude, get up, we gotta run.
He was right. The man was approaching us fast. How could he have seen us? We ran through the woods with the leaves crunching under us, giving away our position. When Anthony tripped over something, I crouched down with him, hoping we had run far enough. Not even 20 seconds later, oncoming footsteps from the direction we were running from came fast. They slowed down only 2 trees away from us, as we lay face down in the leaves. Moments later, the footsteps take off in another direction. We waited until we could no longer hear them, and took off back in the direction of the house. While running, over the sound of leaves crushing and my heavy breathing, I could swear I heard leaves crushing from behind us. We made it back to his backyard, into his house, and this time remembering to shut the back door. We were now able to call the police. Anthony stayed on the line with them, while I patrolled the back windows, making sure nobody was out there. It was so dark though, I couldn't see anything. So I did something that seems stupid today. I turned on his backyard lights, and immediately in the distance, over by the woods, I saw him, standing in front of a big tree. He turned off back into the woods and disappeared out of sight. That was the last time me or Anthony ever saw him. I would be lying if I told you we heard the occasional knocks at our windows or something cliche. No, that was it. 5 years have passed and nothing has happened. Do I wonder if it was somehow linked to the prank call? Maybe. Does it make sense? Not really. But yeah, this was the story of how me and my still best friend Anthony almost died during a break-in. Me and my wife have had our fair share of arguments, but there was this one night that she wouldn't stop bitching over the stupidest shit. It got to the point where I forgot to put the toilet seat down, and she lectured me at the top of her lungs with an ear-piercing voice that I just couldn't take it anymore. I called my buddy Paul up, and he told me I could crash there for the night. I was exhausted, and I didn't need to deal with my crazy wife at the time. Paul had a huge house, which was another thing my wife always yelled at me about, how all my friends have nicer houses than us. We had a few beers and had a bro chat. He suggested I stay there for as long as I needed, but I assured him I'd only stay for one night. I didn't want to be a bother. I slept in one of his guest bedrooms. Surprisingly, he has 3 guest bedrooms, but has only needed to use one of them so far. He never uses the other 2 bedrooms, and only plans on using them for a party or something like that. All 3 guest bedrooms in the house are lined up next to each other, while Paul's bedroom is across the hall. It's a weird setup for sure, but it let me hear strange noises coming from the next room over. I assumed it was Paul doing something in there, but it quickly got annoying, so I decided to just walk over and see what was going on. I tried the doorknob, but it was locked. I cracked the door open to Paul's room and asked him what the noise was. He was already in bed as well. He didn't hear anything. Upon asking why he kept the door locked, he told me he always keeps those 2 doors locked, as he keeps some personal belongings in there. I warned him that there was a strange noise coming from the room, and he told me to just go back to sleep, and if I continued to hear it, come back to him. So I did. I went back to bed, and the noises were completely gone now. A half hour passed. I was starting to drift off to sleep at last, when I heard the slightest tap on the wall. It came from the other side, the next room over. It was followed by a faint voice. I jolted up from the bed and ran back to Paul's room. This time, he took me seriously. He got the key to the 2 doors and unlocked the one next to mine. We stepped inside and felt a breeze hit us on the way in. The window was completely open, along with the closet. We dug through the entire room. The bed had marks on it as if someone were on it. The closet was full of empty bags, and his valuable belongings that were in his drawers were gone. Paul suddenly ran out to the hallway. I was confused at first, but I caught on quickly as he was checking the other room. I was right by his side as he unlocked the door to the 3rd guest bedroom, and the first thing we saw was a black figure jumping out the window onto the patio roof. Paul was about to jump out after him, but we instead both ran outside through the back door in hopes to catch him. He was gone already. It's a good thing we didn't catch him though, because what we found in this room was far more disturbing. The white sheets on the bed were stained with blood. The closet had the butcher knife he had been missing sitting on the floor with a few blood spots on it. And of course, all of his valuable belongings were gone. These people, most likely homeless and likely dangerous drug addicts, were living in his home for a little more than a week. He had even mentioned something about how fast his food goes, and yet he's so skinny when we were drinking. That made a lot more sense now. As far as we know, none of them were ever caught. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was my first sleepover, an important part of my childhood. It was my good friend. His name was Jordan. We were 10 years old. He had a huge basement where we could play video games until 1 in the morning and then sleep on the couches. Skipping the teeth brushing like 2 little rebels, we went straight to trying to get some sleep on the couches. I fell asleep with ease. I woke up at some unknown time. I realized the TV was still on, with a blank screen. It was giving off a very dim light, but it was enough to notice something in the far corner of the basement, by the stairs. It was some tall object. I didn't know what it was, and I can't really describe how it looked. All I know is it almost reached the ceiling. The sound of the TV turning off and the small amount of light vanishing was almost enough to make me start screaming. I shut my eyes and just laid there motionless. I don't even remember falling back asleep. All I remember is waking up to a sudden and horrid screaming coming from upstairs. It was Jordan's mom. He woke up as well, and we looked at each other before sprinting upstairs to his parents' room. His mom was sitting there crying as his dad was turning the room upside down looking for what she saw. He barged out past us looking for anybody in the house, but there was nobody in the house. No signs of entry or exit. I'm still friends with Jordan today, and the last time I brought this up, he said his mom doesn't like to talk about it, but she did once admit she saw a tall, dark figure standing by their bedroom door. I'm undoubtedly sure that's what I saw in the basement that night. Police officers have always gotten a bad rap for their authority over us, which is very often abused. However, the police are the first ones to get called into action whenever trouble arises, and they'll no doubt see some disturbing stuff. Here are 4 haunting stories of former police officers. Number 4. I was a cop for 30 years. I retired at the age of 50, so of course I had some weird calls. But I'll never forget the night that me and my partner Steve were called to respond to a domestic abuse report. The call was made by a neighbor. These calls were never really a big deal. It usually gave us something to do during the night. Not that I enjoy dealing with couples fighting and all that stuff. So we arrived at the house. I still vividly remember the address, and I remember the door was left wide open. The second we stepped inside, the strong scent of marijuana filled our lungs. It was everywhere. Not just marijuana though. There was the strong smell of chemicals, which we assumed was either meth or cocaine. We made our presence known by asking for the couple to come out into sight. A thump from the upstairs gave away their position. Steve had his hand on his holster, ready to pull his gun. But me? I wasn't nervous yet. Steve told me to move quietly up the stairs. We normally listen to each other, so I humored his paranoia. There were 3 doors, 2 open and 1 closed. The closed door led in the direction where the thud in the ceiling was. I banged on the door before swinging it open myself. The smell was the first thing we noticed, then the body. The body was very obviously rotted. We knew even in the dark. We pulled our guns. Steve turned on the light. I told him to scan that room while I scanned the rest of the house. I was shaking all over now. I hated my job at that moment. I wanted to run back to the car and leave, for I was sure I could die at any moment. I found my hand to be stuck on the doorknob until I finally had the balls to turn it and push the door open with force. I turned the light on, but there was nobody inside. It was a disturbingly tiny room. No windows and no furniture, except for a dirty old cot. Steve suddenly screamed, and I rushed across the hall to see what was going on. There was some shirtless guy laying flat above one of the dressers in the room. We had him at gunpoint, yelling at him to come down, when something grabbed my ankle and tried to pull me to the floor. There was a hand coming from under the bed. I stomped on the arm with my other foot and pulled out a frail, trashy-looking woman who was obviously baked. I cuffed her and Steve cuffed the man. We were on our way outside with the two crazies screaming at us, but we had one final surprise coming. Some psycho from upstairs started screaming, charging at us down the stairs with a knife raised in the air. Steve reacted just fast enough to save my ass by 2 seconds, shooting the guy dead. This was a crack house. Somehow none of the neighbors could smell anything suspicious. The dead woman on the bed was killed by the man of the two we caught, who admitted to killing her due to lack of payment. The man was sentenced to life without parole. The woman was sentenced to 30 years. Steve says he never felt bad about what he did. He says he just rid the world of one more piece of trash. Number 3. Myself and a buddy on my squad responded to an alarm. The incident location was an old office-type building that had been converted to a doctor's office. There was a pharmacy attached to it as well. Our dispatch received a motion signal from an upstairs office. The key holder arrives on the scene and we go in to secure the building. The stairs were locked behind a door that, of course, the key holder didn't have a key to, so we took the elevator up to the second floor. The elevator opens to a pitch-black hallway, except for one overhead light at the end of the hall. We start checking the doors, and so far, all are secured. We get to the last office, and sure enough, the door is unlocked. We make entry and observe it to be an unused office. The door opened to a sizable waiting room and reception area. There were about 10 or 12 exam rooms, all cleared with no hiccups. We exit the office, and immediately, something seems off. That's when I realized the overhead light at our end of the hallway that was on before had been turned off. It was replaced by another light over at the elevators. I look at my squad mate and he's completely white. I ask him what's wrong, and he says,
Weren't all those doors we just checked closed and locked?
I tell him, yeah, so? My buddy says,
Well, now they're all standing open.
sure enough, all the offices down the hallway we had just checked were now standing open. The pucker factor sinks in at this point, so we start clearing and securing offices. We finish the last office, and on our way out, just before we turn the corner to get into the waiting area, the main door just slams shut. Then our radios start going nuts with some kind of static feedback. Now I just want to get the hell out of there. We get back in the elevator and head down to the first floor in hopes to make contact with the key holder again. However, the key holder is nowhere to be found. I contact dispatch and request a callback number for the key holder so I can advise him of what we found. Dispatch states that the key holder was still en route to us and was advising an ETA of 5 minutes. I advised dispatch that we had already been out with the key holder. Dispatch requests I give them a call. I call dispatch, and she tells me that there is no way we were out with the key holder. She states that the alarm company had only just made contact with one. Eventually, the real key holder arrives on the scene, and I ask her about the man that had let us in the building. She asked me to describe him, so I did. She states that sounds like one of the doctors that used to lease the office on the second floor at the end of the hall. She then states that he had committed suicide at his summer home several days ago. Number 2. I was responding to a call in the village. A resident was reporting noises coming from one of the abandoned buildings from across the street, most likely trespassing. I arrived and began my search in the building. It used to be a 2-story convenience store. Now it was completely stripped empty, except for the parts attached to the floor, like the counter and shelves. The lights didn't work in there either. I checked every small aisle for anyone to possibly be hiding in, and then I did the same thing upstairs. It was completely empty. On my way back into my car, I looked back at the building and saw somebody at the window on the 2nd floor. It was a woman with long gray hair down past her shoulders. She was no doubt looking down at me with a wide smile on her face. I hurried back inside, making it upstairs in no more than 10 seconds. But the window was clear. There was nobody in sight. I checked all 3 aisles at least 10 times. I checked behind the counter. I checked the bathroom. It was clear. I was a little nervous, so I left again, thinking my mind was fooling me. I looked back at the window, and there she was again. The same mockingly disturbing smile on her face. I went back up there again, this time running around all 3 aisles trying to find this woman. I was about to give it up once more and leave for good when I noticed something in my peripheral vision. It was on the ceiling. A dark shade of black latched onto the ceiling. I shined my light up there, and there she was. That crazed woman looked at me, still with a horrifying smile on her face, as she held onto 2 hook-like objects in the ceiling with her hands, while her feet were pushed up against the tile to gain support. She laughed like a freak all the way down to the station. I don't know if she had some kind of mental disability or not. It seemed like she was just toying with me, but not at all in a good way. She stared me down through the mirror the whole ride. Number 1. In all my years of being a police officer in Floyd County, Georgia, I had only experienced 2 horrifying situations. I'll share with you the worst of the 2. It was a slow night, and I was patrolling the dirt roads in my cruiser. At this particular spot, there were tiny woods on both sides of the road. And then it all started. I spotted somebody jumping into the woods on the left. I only saw half of them though. They were gone so quickly. I pulled up closer and shined a spotlight into the woods. I didn't see them. Unfortunately, it was kind of my job to check on things like this, so I hesitantly stepped out from the car and began searching. In a moment like this, I was so ready to pull my gun, as I was actually terrified. And then, the cliched snap of a branch from behind a tree almost made me want to run back to the car, but I instead did my job and called for them to come out. Someone wearing a mask stepped out from the tree. I told them to raise their arms, take off their mask, and come to me slowly. They raised their hands, but they didn't remove the mask. I tried to demonstrate my authority by yelling this time, ordering them to take it off. They looked as if they were about to take it off, when suddenly, he or she looked to their left, and then back at me. I heard footsteps coming from my right. I drew my gun. I yelled as loud as I could for everybody to come out with their hands up. You may be thinking, why? Well, if you were in this position, in this setting, you would have been shitting yourself just like I was. Another person wearing a mask walked over. This one holding an axe. I had my gun locked on him. But suddenly, footsteps started coming from all directions. I looked around, and I was surrounded. There were at least 10 strangers wearing masks, surrounding me almost in a circle, with only an opening behind me. Half of them were armed with axes and the like. I stood there, gun raised, but not even aimed at anything at this point. I felt like I was going to throw up. One of them, I'm not sure which, finally broke the silence, telling me in a muffled, deep voice, "Go away." My heart dropped as he said this, in a way that I knew I was going to live. I turned and ran for the car, driving down the road half a mile, all while calling for backup. As you would guess, the whole group was gone from the woods when a search squad arrived. I have a theory on this, however. I believe that what I witnessed was some kind of fucked up secret society that was planning on trapping an innocent passerby, and I think that whoever jumped into the woods as I was passing recognized my car as a police car and tried to hide. Had I not been a police officer, I believe they would have stopped me, led me to the woods, and done whatever this group does for its sick kicks. On Christmas Day, 1996, 32-year-old Patty Vaughn left her home in Lavernia, Texas, and never came back. Her car was found 15 miles from her house, but her body was never discovered. The only thing that she left behind were bloodstains all around her house and 3 children, all who were playing in their house at the time and didn't notice she was gone until hours later. In 2001, the Merlin family was attending a small Christmas party in Denver. A Santa Claus was hired anonymously to come in and hand out presents to the children at the party. It was seen by many attending the party that the Santa Claus whispered something into one of the Merlin sons' ears when he was sitting on his lap. A few minutes after the Santa said his goodbyes and left the party, the young Merlin boy left the firehouse that was hosting the party as well, only to never be seen or heard from again. The anonymous Santa also disappeared without a trace. Tracy Mertens moved from Birmingham to Rochdale with her boyfriend Joey Cavandia and their 2 young children. On December 23rd, she went back to her old flat to fetch some things when 2 men came inside the flat and abducted her. The men took her to the town of Eaton, placed her on the steps in front of a church, and burned her alive. She managed to stay alive long enough to tell the story and kept repeating what the men were asking her, "Where is Joey?" before they set her on fire. Joey debunked ever having known anyone who would have done this to his family. 19-year-old Rhonda Hinton was murdered on December 22, 1981 after attending a company Christmas party. She died from someone firing a bullet that traveled through the trunk and driver's seat and then into her heart. What was never explained about Rhonda's murder was a mystery man who witnesses had spotted standing next to her car around the time of her death. Rhonda's parents also told the police she was acting strange just days before the murder occurred. During the 1960s and 70s, the city Warminster in England was known as a place where UFO sightings kept happening. However, the sightings were not initially flying objects, rather unexplained sounds. The most curious case was of Marjorie Bai, who was on her way home from a Christmas church service when she was knocked to the ground and paralyzed by the strange vibrating noises. She described the experience as being pinned down by the invisible fingers of sound. She never recovered. Jared Betterson and Susan Klingel lived in Dearborn, Michigan with their daughter Nicole. Soon after Nicole turned 2, they were in a car accident and Nicole's mother Susan passed away. Jared then remarried to a woman named Barbara with whom he decided to move, but never saying where to exactly to his family or his late wife's family. Ever since that move, Nicole was never seen again, and Jared and Barbara were only found after they both committed suicide 20 years later. The only thing left behind them was a note saying they were sorry for all they've done. In 2007, in a small town in Arkansas, there was an unknown man dressed as Santa Claus walking around town that left gifts on about 6 people's stoops. 5 of them were later revealed to be old useless toys and other junk, while Jamie Frester and her husband received a package containing a series of papers. Most of them consisted of nothing but old office papers dating back to the 80s and 90s, but there was one note that stood out due to its large writing. It said simply, "I'm sorry for whatever happens to your son." 2 years later, their 12-year-old son Chris was hit by a car while crossing the street on his bike and suffered fatal injuries. The car that hit him did not stop to help and was never identified. To this day, it was never learned who the mysterious Santa Claus was, or if that note was purely coincidental. 38-year-old Lockhart, Texas resident Latricia White was spending Christmas of 1994 with her boyfriend Lee Wackerhagen and his 9-year-old son Chance. Lee was supposed to drop off his son to his mother on Christmas Day, but decided to keep him for a few more days. A few days later, Lee's girlfriend Latricia was found dead in their apartment, and Lee and his son were never seen again. The police suspected Lee killed Latricia and ran, taking his son with him, but their suspicions were never confirmed, as Lee was never found. Everyone who celebrates Christmas knows the song A Visit from St. Nicholas, or better known as 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. However, the origin of this song has a fair amount of mystery links to it. For many years, no one knew who wrote it. A visit from St. Nicholas was sent anonymously to the Sentinel, a newspaper in New York, and first published on December 23, 1823. It's still not established who wrote it, as several men came forward saying it was them, but literature experts were never really able to determine who was telling the truth. The original author was finally determined in 1837 when Clement Clark Moore claimed authorship.